It was a cold, drizzly afternoon in New York City, the kind of day that makes most people retreat indoors. But for Barron Trump, it was an opportunity to step out of the spotlight and into a world far removed from the opulent halls of his upbringing. Now in his late teens, Barron had developed a reputation for being reserved yet remarkably grounded. On this particular day, dressed in a simple hoodie and jeans, he decided to visit a local homeless shelter. No cameras, no entourage, just a young man seeking to connect with people who often go unnoticed. Little did he know, this visit would lead to a profound moment of connection that would stay with him forever. The car slowly pulled up to the entrance of the shelter, a modest but welcoming building tucked away on a quiet street. The bright afternoon sun bathed the area in a soft glow, and the sounds of children laughing and playing nearby made the air feel lively and full of hope. Barron Trump sat in the back seat, his eyes scanning the small sign above the entrance, Hope Haven Shelter. He was no stranger to charity work, but this was different. This was a place that truly represented the struggle and resilience of many who had fallen on hard times. The shelter's reputation for offering both physical and emotional support was well known, and Barron had chosen to visit it today, not for any publicity, but to give his time and attention to those in need. As the car came to a stop, a few people standing outside turned to look at the vehicle. Barron stepped out, his height immediately noticeable. His casual outfit, a simple navy polo and khaki pants, was a sharp contrast to the sleek black vehicle he'd arrived in. His appearance was low-key, but there was a quiet confidence about him that could not be ignored. The shelter's volunteer coordinator, Maria, stepped forward to greet him with a warm smile. She was in her late 30s, dressed in a modest white shirt with the shelter's logo on it and jeans. Her face showed a mixture of surprise and genuine appreciation as Barron approached her. "Mr. Trump, it's an honor to have you here today," Maria said, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you so much for taking the time to visit us." Barron gave her a kind smile, shaking her hand firmly. "It's my pleasure, Maria. I've heard so much about the amazing work you all do here." They shared a brief moment of eye contact, and in that second, something unspoken passed between them, a mutual understanding of the importance of what they were about to do. As they walked towards the entrance together, Barron's eyes briefly met the gaze of a young girl sitting on the steps, her face filled with hope, but also marked by hardship. He gave her a quiet nod, his presence making the moment feel somewhat surreal. This wasn't just a publicity stunt. It was a genuine effort to understand, connect, and support. The door to the shelter opened, and they stepped inside, greeted by the buzzing energy of the volunteers and the hum of people working tirelessly to help those in need. Barron took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. This visit was more than a gesture. It was the beginning of a deeper connection to a cause that had been so close to his heart for years. As Barron walked deeper into the shelter, he was immediately struck by the sense of community. Volunteers, some in their teens, others in their 30s and 40s, moved around the space with purpose, organizing food, sorting clothes, and interacting with the shelter's residents. The atmosphere was full of a quiet determination, a shared commitment to helping those in need. Maria, a volunteer who had been guiding him, introduced Barron to some of the staff as they made their way through the shelter. Barron shook hands with each volunteer he met, his face calm but attentive. He spoke to them with genuine interest, asking how long they had been volunteering, what they found most rewarding about their work, and how he could contribute to their efforts. His questions felt personal, not like a typical interview or a public appearance, but as if he truly wanted to understand their stories. "Thank you for all you're doing here," Barron said to one young woman who had just finished preparing a group of meals. She smiled shyly, clearly caught off guard by his directness, but she returned his kindness. "It's our honor to help," she replied. "It's a team effort." Barron nodded and continued his walk, his presence calming the space. As he moved through the shelter, he observed the residents. There were families seated together, children coloring at tables, and older individuals sitting in chairs, talking softly. Barron's gaze lingered on the children, their faces full of curiosity as they watched the new visitor. He approached a small group of children sitting near the play area, all of them holding stuffed animals or small toys. Barron crouched down to their level, his voice gentle as he introduced himself. "Hey, I'm Barron. What's your name?" he asked the nearest girl, a young child with curly hair and a wide smile. "Lily," the girl said, shy but clearly intrigued by the tall figure before her. "Well, it's nice to meet you, Lily," Barron smiled warmly. "Are you having fun here?" Lily nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, we get to play all day, and there are snacks." Barron chuckled softly, his eyes lighting up at her enthusiasm. He stood and turned to Maria, who was quietly observing the interaction. "Everyone seems so happy here," Barron said to Maria, his voice soft with genuine admiration. "You're all doing amazing work." Maria smiled at him, proud of how engaged Barron was with the residents. "We try our best to keep their spirits high. It makes a world of difference." As Barron continued to interact with more residents, his calm presence and respect for everyone he met were evident. He listened carefully, smiled often, and treated each person, no matter their age, with kindness and respect. As Barron continued to engage with the shelter's residents, he couldn't help but notice Maria's quiet dedication. She had been guiding him throughout the day, explaining the various programs and efforts they had in place to help the people who came through the shelter's doors. Yet, there was something more to Maria. Barron could sense that there was a depth to her compassion, a kind of selflessness that made her stand out among the other volunteers. It wasn't until the shelter's residents were settled for their mid-afternoon meal that Barron and Maria found a moment to sit and talk. The hustle and bustle of the shelter slowed down a bit, and the two found themselves seated in a small, cozy corner of the building. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, casting a warm, golden light through the windows and creating a peaceful, almost serene ambience. Barron and Maria sat across from one another, their conversations surrounded by the soft hum of activity in the background. Maria had a gentle smile, her eyes revealing the quiet strength that had carried her through years of volunteer work. Barron, despite his young age, had a maturity about him. The way he listened intently to Maria, his eyes focused and thoughtful, showed that he valued her perspective. He wasn't just there to observe, he was genuinely learning from her. "You know," Maria began, her voice soft but steady, "this place, it's not just about feeding people or giving them a bed, it's about restoring dignity. Many of the people who come here, they've been through things that most of us can't even imagine. Sometimes, all they need is someone to talk to, someone to see them, to acknowledge that they matter." Barron listened, nodding slowly. "I can see that. There's a lot more going on here than I expected. It's like you're creating a community." Maria smiled, a hint of gratitude in her eyes. "Exactly. We try to make it feel like a home. People need hope, especially when they've lost everything. Here they can at least find a little bit of peace." There was a pause, as both of them took in the weight of the conversation. Barron shifted slightly, glancing over at the group of residents now enjoying their meal. The scene was peaceful, but there was an undeniable sense of vulnerability in the air. He turned his gaze back to Maria, his face serious for a moment. "You're doing something important here," he said quietly. "I don't think people always realize how much these little moments matter. Just giving someone the chance to feel human again." Maria looked at Barron, her expression softening. "Thank you. That means a lot to hear from someone like you." There was an understanding between them, an unspoken bond that transcended words. Barron wasn't just a visitor. He was someone who truly understood the value of what Maria and the others were doing. Maria, in turn, recognized that Barron wasn't here for the publicity or recognition. He was here because he cared. He was her. For a moment, the world outside the shelter seemed to fade away. It was just Barron and Maria, sitting together in the warm, fading sunlight, sharing an understanding that was rare and special. Their conversation continued, more casually now, but it was clear that this was a pivot. As the day at the shelter came to a close, Barron was still processing everything he had experienced. The laughter, the stories, and the simple yet powerful connections he had witnessed all seemed to linger in his mind. The reality of what he had seen that day was so much deeper than he had anticipated. He had come in with the intention of learning more about the shelter's operations and the people it helped. but what he left with was a deeper understanding of the resilience of the human spirit. It was late afternoon when Barron stepped outside the shelter, the soft glow of the setting sun casting long shadows across the sidewalk. The air was cool, and the bustling city noise seemed to feel distant, almost muted, as he stood there, reflecting on the day. His mind kept drifting back to the conversations he'd had, especially with Maria, whose words about dignity and hope had stuck with him the most. Barron had seen people struggling, yes, but he had also seen hope, camaraderie, and the quiet, steadfast resilience that flowed through everyone at the shelter. His driver, who had been waiting for him nearby, opened the car door. As Barron slid into the back seat, he noticed a sense of calm wash over him, yet his thoughts remained tangled with everything he had learned. The shelter, the people, the way they cared for each other, it had been unlike anything he had ever imagined. It was one thing to hear about the struggles of the homeless and marginalized, but to witness it firsthand, to see their humanity up close, was an entirely different experience. As the car started to drive away from the shelter, Barron couldn't help but think about the faces he had seen. There had been so many individuals, each with their own story, their own pain, and their own path toward recovery. Yet there was one moment that stood out more than the rest. The exchange with Maria had left an indelible mark on him. It wasn't just the words they had shared, but the quiet, genuine understanding between them that had resonated so deeply. Barron had always been aware of the world's challenges, but today had given him a rare glimpse into the lives of those who faced the most difficult struggles. The moment with Maria wasn't just a passing conversation. It had shifted something inside him. Barron found himself thinking about the privilege he had in his own life. He had always been aware of his family's status, but today he had experienced something that most people in his position rarely do. True connection with people who lived lives completely different from his own. The experience humbled him. He wasn't sure how it would change him in the long run, but he knew that he couldn't forget what he had seen. Later that evening, as Barron sat down with his family for dinner, he felt different. The usual conversations about school, events, and the media seemed to fade into the background. Instead, Barron's thoughts kept drifting back to the shelter and the faces of the people he had met. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had just witnessed something extraordinary. Barron's parents, aware that their son had spent the day at the shelter, were curious about his experience. "So, how was it?" his mother asked, a smile on her face as she tried to gauge his thoughts. Barron paused for a moment, his fork hovering above his plate. He wasn't sure how to summarize the day. Words didn't seem enough to capture what he had witnessed, but he found himself saying, "It was eye-opening. People are just people. They've been through so much, but they're still standing. It's just different than I imagined." His mother raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. "Different how?" Barron set his fork down and looked his mother in the eyes. It wasn't just about giving food or shelter. It was about giving them their dignity back. "I saw people helping each other, caring for one another. It was like they were a community, not just a group of strangers." His parents exchanged a brief look before nodding. They knew their son had a natural empathy, but this was something deeper. Barron had witnessed something that could never be taught in school or found in textbooks: the strength of human connection and the power of kindness. Later that night, Barron couldn't stop thinking about Maria and the other volunteers. He realized that their work was far from glamorous, and the struggles of those they helped weren't easily overcome. Yet, these individuals had managed to create something remarkable in the face of adversity. A sense of community, of hope, had emerged from the hardest of circumstances. Barron knew that no matter where life took him, the lessons he had learned that day would remain with him. The following day, Barron made a decision. He would return to the shelter, not as a visitor, but as someone who could contribute. He couldn't forget the faces of those who had taught him so much. And as he thought about it, he realized that there was so much more to be done. As Barron looked back on his visit to the shelter, he realized just how much that one day had changed his perspective on life. It was one of those rare moments when you can feel your worldview shifting, a moment when everything you thought you knew suddenly felt incomplete. The people he had met, the stories they shared, and the compassion they had shown each other. All of it made a lasting impression on him. The experience had given him something invaluable, a glimpse into the lives of those who often go unnoticed, whose struggles are hidden behind the noise of everyday life. For Barron, the time spent at the shelter wasn't just about helping or witnessing hardship. It was about seeing the humanity in everyone he encountered. He understood now that homelessness, poverty, and despair were not just statistics. They were real, complex human experiences. And the people facing them were no different than anyone else. The day had taught him the power of small acts of kindness and the importance of dignity. In a world that often feels divided and disconnected, it was heartening to witness how a simple smile, a helping hand, or a shared conversation could make a profound difference. Barron couldn't help but feel that his own life was richer for having experienced it. It wasn't just the individuals at the shelter who had taught him lessons. The volunteers, like Maria, had demonstrated that it's the simple, everyday acts of compassion that change lives. As he continued to reflect, Barron realized that his visit had only been the beginning. His connection to the shelter and the people there didn't have to end with one visit. There was always more to be done, and he wanted to be part of it. Barron felt motivated to find ways to give back, to advocate for those who needed a voice, and to ensure that the dignity of others was never forgotten. He understood now that the path to making a real difference wasn't always about grand gestures. It was about consistent, meaningful actions. He walked away from that day knowing that he had learned more than he could have ever expected, and that those lessons would continue to guide him for years to come. In a world full of challenges, Barron had seen firsthand how hope, compassion, and connection could light the way for others, and for himself. It wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about humanity. With this realization in his heart, Barron knew that he was ready to make the world a better place in whatever way he could, one small act of kindness at a time.